Greetings and welcome to The Thirsty Mage, the podcast going back in time 37 years to play one of the all-time classic RPGs. I'm your host, David Lloyd, and at the pub, we're talking about a title from a franchise that we've actually covered very little on this podcast, given its significance in the RPG genre. Dragon Quest was released in Japan in 1986, and the English-speaking world got to experience it as Dragon Warrior in 1989. Those with a Nintendo Power subscription even got a free copy, as Nintendo looked to unload unsold cartridges of the game back in the late 80s there. So does the classic RPG still hold up today? And in the year 2023, what's the best way to play it? To answer these questions, I'm joined by my fellow retro video game lover, Jordan Rudick.
Yeah, hey David. It is surprising that we haven't talked about Dragon Quest too much. I feel like we've spent maybe more time talking about its spin-offs, like the Monster Dragon Quest Monsters. We brought up a couple months ago. I was playing that on my pocket, and I know we've talked about Dragon Quest Builders as well, Dragon Quest Treasures. But the mainline games is not, given how many of them there are, and just how into those kind of games we are. It is surprising that we haven't had more dedicated episodes to them. But I mean, obviously we've talked about Dragon Quest 11 a bunch, and going back to some of these games is definitely something I want to do. I know we're both really looking forward to the HD version of Dragon Quest 3 coming out, hope maybe even this year. We'll see, but yeah, I'm eager to get into this one too.
Yeah, it's one of those things too. This all kind of came about in the sense that I was looking at the games coming out this year and having anxiety of all these new games, and just reorganizing my priorities, and then thinking, there's a whole lot of Square Enix games I haven't played in the past. My backlog is littered. Like, I've played a lot of them, but not all of them. And so I was, I pulled out a spreadsheet and put all the English games that Enix made and Square made, and right up until this year, and thought, okay, let's see, what are my big gaps here? And I owned Dragon Warrior as a kid back in the day, and didn't play it nearly as much as Final Fantasy. I don't think I quite understood how to play and how to actually do things back then. I ended up gravitating more to the Final Fantasy, but I just, like you said, with the 3D remake, the 2D HD remake, the 2D HD remake of 3 on the horizon any day now, I thought, it's a good time to go back. And we've only done really one episode on a Dragon Quest like mainline game, like you said, 11, and that was years ago when it came out on Switch.
That's right.
It seems like a gap that we had to actually start talking about.
I mean, I was in the same boat as you, right? Like, I don't know if it was strictly an age thing. Like, I would have been 4 when Dragon Warrior came to the States, and then 5 when Final Fantasy came to the States. And maybe it was the player's guide that we had for Final Fantasy. You remember the one, like, I think that was another kind of freebie from Nintendo Power as well. I definitely had that, and we've talked about that one on the show before. But yeah, maybe it's the coupling of having that player's guide, maybe kind of playing the game with my dad a little bit. We didn't get into Dragon Warriors, which I remember renting. Probably the first game, maybe 2 or 3 at some point as well. But I did find them kind of primitive compared to Final Fantasy, and it was just hard to not make that comparison, right? Like, these were 2 of like the bigger or biggest like RPG franchises. Just from reading Nintendo Power and kind of reading other video game magazines, you knew that these were going to be a thing. And yeah, just finding it harder to go back to Dragon Warrior again. Maybe I was just too young when it first came out. Maybe that was part of it, or I didn't have a player's guide. Player's guide, when you're 5 years old, a player's guide can be extremely helpful. Showing you all the, man. I remember just poring over like all the enemies and how much HP they had, what they were weak to, all that stuff. And I wonder if I had something like that for Dragon Warrior, would I have been more into it, just having a guide to kind of walk me through at that young age? I wonder if that was something that could have really gotten me into the series a bit more. But as it was, I just became like a Final Fantasy kid, and so Dragon Warrior and then eventually Dragon Quest was something a little bit more on the periphery for me. And then Super Nintendo didn't have, at least in the West, didn't have a Dragon Warrior Dragon Quest game, which was a little odd. I think there 4, I believe, came to NES or Famicom, and then maybe I think there's a Super Famicom version as well. But really, there wasn't another one in the West that I can remember until Dragon Quest maybe 5 or 6 on PlayStation. And again, never owned a PlayStation, so it wouldn't have been until the DS, I think, really, that I got back into the Dragon Quest mainline series, with maybe 5 or 6 probably would have been the first one I played there. And then being super excited for the remakes of 7 and 8 coming to 3DS. But man, but again, that's it's such a there's so many years kind of in the middle between that where I'm just not playing a Dragon Quest game. So it is a little bit of kind of a funny series for me, and I adore it now, but that's all kind of going back to those games after the long since they've come out.
Yeah, there seems to have been like a few different times where there's been really big gaps. Like there, I think Dragon Quest X was like an online game in Japan, right? So you're looking at the gap between
Right.
9 and 11, which I think was like something like 10 years or so. It was pretty big. And then I don't even remember Dragon. So like you said, we had Dragon Warrior, and then Dragon Warrior 2, 3, and 4 all came out on NES and all in the West. But
Yeah.
uh, I never witnessed a cartridge in the wild myself. Like nobody I knew had one.
No,
Uh,
same. Yeah.
and I don't think Dragon Warrior really took off as much in the West as Final Fantasy did either. So there's that as well. And it's funny you mentioned about having a guide probably would have helped as a child. And it's like, you know what, as a 41-year-old dude, a
It
guide
still
was kind of
helps.
helpful too. So
Still helps today. Yeah.
yeah,
We don't need the pictures as much. We can just use game facts and just read it. But
yeah,
yeah, the pictures, all the bright colors, the maps. Gosh, the maps obviously would have been huge. Like maps of like in Final Fantasy 1, like the Earth Temple, the fire, the volcano, Mount Gold, all that stuff was super super helpful, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, you make a good point. Like that, people around us didn't necessarily play the game, and it was harder to get into a game like this unless you had friends playing it. And on the playground, NES, like there were a couple people that might have played Final Fantasy, but it was mostly Mario, Zelda, stuff like that. But it's funny for there to be so many Dragon Warrior games on NES, but none of my friends to have them. And then all my buddies had a Super Nintendo. Everybody on my street growing up that I was friends with, we all had Super Nintendos. But again, there was 2 Final Fantasy games on the Super Nintendo, but there were no Dragon Quest games on the
Yeah,
Super Nintendo. So at a time that was kind of, I guess, really formative for my gaming career, my gaming life, for that series, and to be so into RPGs, and the Super Nintendo to be such an RPG powerhouse, to not have that Dragon Quest game that just felt. I mean, that would have been the chance, right? That was the
yeah.
chance to get
Strange, really.
a young David and a young Jordan into this
Yeah,
series more, was putting them on that console.
yeah, exactly. It's sometimes it's just the availability of games that can get you hooked, and they just they weren't around.
And
And I
it
was the
wasn't.
same with you. I
Yeah,
didn't have a PlayStation for the longest time either.
yeah, exactly.
It wasn't really until PlayStation 2 came out that I even started going back to some of the old uh, Final Fantasies on PlayStation,
Hmm.
because you could, it was backwards compatible for the first games, or for the first PlayStation games. So
And what's funny is Enix, being distinct from Square at the time, or SquareSoft, it's not like they didn't have a fairly prolific output of games on Super Nintendo, right? They brought a wide variety of RPGs to Super Nintendo. Illusion of Gaia, Seventh Saga, Soul Blazer. The list goes
ActRaiser,
on. ActRaiser, of course. Like, so they did a lot of work with that console, but to
just
not
not Dragon
bring
Quest.
like what's really
Chrono Trigger.
Chrono Trigger. I mean, all these games that um, people resonated with, RPG fans certainly got into, but to not bring like your franchise, your flag. I mean, the Enix kind of flagship, I think, was still, at least in Japan, like Dragon Quest. To not see any of those come west at that time was odd. I guess they maybe just really gun shy after a lack of success on the NES. You take 3 or 4 shots at a console, and the games just don't work out. Like, maybe you get a little just gun shy about the next one.
Yeah, they must have just looked at their sales and said, like, forget it. We're not, Final Fantasy's eating their breakfast over here. So,
Yeah.
there just isn't enough room for two. Maybe, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
But yeah, I guess we can jump into the breakdown of the game itself. I've been playing I've been uploading some pics on social media lately on my fun adventure of into playing my old NES. It's dusted it off, picked up. I had Dragon Quest. It was funny. I was actually looking at Dragon Warrior, looking to buy it, and then before I actually pulled the trigger on a purchase, I thought to myself, I swear to God, it's in my house somewhere. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
really start looking. And lo and behold, there it was. I found it eventually, so saved myself some money. But I had to fix a few pins on my NES to so that I didn't have to keep blowing on the cartridge, and works like a dream now. And I got an old CRT television from my parents-in-law. It's basic. It's like the gold standard. It's like a Sony Vega Trinitron, and it's like it looks amazing. I had to do
Yeah, it's
some
perfect for that.
adjustments, but just it looks incredible. And so I'm playing it old school. I'm playing it on an NES, and I'm every day I got my fingers crossed that that battery doesn't decide to give out today.
I mean, that's the amazing thing, that some of these games, like the battery is still working, decades after. Whereas, and there are some games where it just doesn't work at all, and you do have to replace it, or
Yeah,
to just beat the game in one sitting, I suppose, which is
yeah.
tougher with Dragon Warrior. I guess you could, just leave it on, and I'm sure we did that growing up, leaving the console on in a long game.
I
I
did that
know
with Turtles, Teenage
yeah,
Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's
I
like if I
know.
had to pause, I wasn't turning
Oh yeah,
that
you're not going through those water
console off.
stages again. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I remember doing this with like Mario, even like Mario 3, right? Like that was a game that didn't. I don't think it had any kind of save feature or
No.
backup,
No.
and so you had to beat the whole thing in one go. Which when you're younger, like that is some undertaking. I guess if you have the warp whistles, it's a little easier. But yeah, that it is good that the battery is still working. That's impressive.
Yeah. And it's been so long, I remember absolutely nothing. So it feels like I'm going in fresh, and was pleasantly surprised that as soon as I hit the power button, that classic Dragon Quest music just kicks in, and it's
Hmm.
in its old school Nintendo sound chip beauty.
It's and you know what, the first game doesn't have like a massive map. It's got one of those really cool things where you see the end of the game at the beginning, right? From the opening town and castle, you can see your destination, and so you kind of have that place in mind of where you need to go. But obviously, it's a very circuitous and kind of roundabout way to get there. There's a lot of things that have to happen before you are ready in terms of like your level, your proficiency, but also just in terms of the world. You have to complete certain quests to get to that castle. But it is one of those cool things where you can see your destination from the outset, and you have that goal, that objective in mind the whole time you're playing, right? Like there aren't too many games that I can think of that do this or do it so well, where that Final Fantasy kind of has that fake out with it, right? Like, of the Chaos Temple kind of being on that first island, or the Chaos Shrine being on that first island. You think, oh, like that this could be the be all end all. And funny enough, it turns out to be the place you end up going back to, right? So
Yeah.
it kind of plays around with that. But Dragon Warrior maybe a little bit more straightforward in how it just kind of gives you that place to look forward to going to, right? Like that castle in the distance, it's so close, like visually it's so close, but so much has to happen before you can actually get there.
Mm-hmm. And it looks fantastic. It's that retro look. It reminds me. It gives me. I'm gonna be comparing it to Final Fantasy all episode long, just because that's
Yeah, we
my
have no
my base
choice.
of reference. But yeah, it just looks great. Like the overworld, it's like the colors look great. All the sprites look incredible. I got like my little warrior guy who's not holding anything when you first start, but then when you start
Mhm.
to equip different items, then you see like the weapon go in the right hand, the shield go in the left hand,
Yeah.
and running around on the overworld, being reminded of the high encounter rate of classic RPGs.
Hmm.
That's always a fun time. Um, love the smiling slimes. Never get old.
Oh, they're so classic. I mean, the villain design in this game is so good. Like it is Toriyama, but 8-bit version of it, right? And so what's cool is to kind of compare how much or how little the designs have changed throughout the Dragon Quest series, right? Like the slimes, obviously, they're still like super familiar, but there's so many enemies that kind of were invented for this game in particular, and then they're almost identical, again 20, 30 years later. And it's neat. Like again, we've talked about Dragon Quest as a series, as a franchise, and its kind of reliance on nostalgia and tradition and just being kind of a familiar kind of comfort food type RPG series. And one major aspect of that is the monsters, right? Like the monsters are almost characters unto themselves, that you look forward to meeting them and seeing them and challenging them. And in later games, they would come to have personalities, right? And some of them would be have dialogue lines, and be part of, you interact with them for quests and missions and stuff like that. But it all started here, right? The foundation is all here, and it's kind of amazing that it's been able to stand the test of time, with these classic designs they've come up with.
Yeah, and you can, like you said, you can see all the, like, the slimes haven't changed in 37
No,
years,
no.
which is hilarious. And then yeah, there's a bunch of different enemies that have very classic looks. Like it's funny seeing some of the, like, the mandrakey, and the first time I got wrecked by the magician
Yeah.
early on in the game. And it's funny, like, the way, so when the way that the random encounters work is you're kind of just walking on the overworld, and then a box comes in the middle where it's just like the enemy just kind of standing there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of have your battle is I would say kind of like a classic Dungeon and Dragon style, like a very turn-based style, where it's like you can do your attack, or you can do your spells if you leveled up enough. And then it's all text-based, where it's like, you've attacked, you've hit this enemy for X amount of hits, now it's the enemy has hit you for this amount of hits, and goes red when you get low in HP. And
Mm.
yeah.
The way it reads out on the screen is almost like a computer RPG, right? Like you can see
Mm-hmm.
the roots of this game coming from, tabletop and older computer RPGs. Like, just the way that all the text is kind of splayed out on screen. It's not very visually, the presentation isn't attractive, but it is filled with information. It does give you that sense, like, oh, I've seen this before. It would be familiar, I think, to people who have played, a game like Ultima, or similar kind of dungeon crawling CRPGs, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I again, one of the things about, I guess, the Game Boy Color version, which I've been playing a little bit of Dragon Warrior 1, is that it kind of tidies up some of that stuff, right? It's a little bit less kind of filled with text, and it's a little bit more kind of numbers and simplified a little bit. I guess makes sense for playing on the smaller screen. You'd want to tidy it up for that reason too. But
Yeah.
something that's cool, I think, and I think this is true of almost every version of the game, that based on the terrain that you are traveling in, your encounter rate is different. So if you're on the plains, or if you're in a dungeon, or a forest, or a desert, I believe your encounter rate changes. So what it means is that certain areas are more treacherous than others, which makes sense, right? If you think about kind of the theming of the game, obviously a darker forest would be more dangerous than the open plains would be. And a dungeon, in theory, would be more treacherous as well, given they're generally smaller areas. But yeah, the encounter rate is different for those. So if you want to grind, it would make sense to go to a specific terrain type, and I fight more enemies and maybe fight more difficult enemies as well. And that's just one of those kind of sophisticated, smaller things that it's coming out in a game like this, that maybe, again, as kids, we wouldn't have really appreciated that necessarily, or maybe we would have known, like, oh, I'm getting into more fights here, I don't want to go in this terrain type very often. But I just think about the terrain types, and when I saw these figures, I was like, oh, like, the game is so colorful, like it's very kind of simple presentation, simple graphics, but you can make a clear distinction between the different parts of the map that you're on. Like, yes, the castles and town kind of look the same, but you see the mountains, you see the water, the forest, they're all very vibrant, kind of striking colors. Like, everything
Mm-hmm.
kind of stands out from one another. So kind of, I guess you get a sense of, like, where you're going or where you've been, even if and for a not a very large map, like, I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and the other thing too about the encounters is I'm pretty sure it's related to your level, because I was doing some grinding outside of Remolder Town,
Hmm.
or Remolder, and I was seeing the same kind of enemy types. I was encountering scorpions, the odd skeleton. I started, warlocks were coming about. And then when I hit, I can't remember the level, maybe it was like level 10 or something like that. as soon as I hit that level, I started encountering enemies I've never seen before. Like now, all of a sudden, I got wolves,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, where'd these guys come from? Like this is the first time. And then it was like every time I had like three wolves in a row, and I'm like, okay, this is new. Like
Yeah.
this character is a lot tougher. I didn't mind too much because they more experience, more gold. And then all of a sudden there was a goldman that popped up, and I'm like, oh, okay, and another new item. Like, oh, clearly, something is triggered with this experience level going up, which is good because like so much of the game is just grinding. It's
Yeah.
like I think that's one of the things that's kind of stands out in this particular game is it's less about the story and more about personal growth of the
Mhm.
main character. Like you only have the one character, whereas your traditional JRPGs are in a party, but you're only ever by your own. Like it's your own personal story, and yeah, it seems like 90% of your time is just getting stronger. Like either you're grinding for experience points to raise your health, or you're grinding for gold so that you can equip better weapon, like a better
Yeah.
weapon, better armor, better shield, and all you're just working towards getting stronger and stronger so that you can take on the Dragon Lord.
Yeah, it's a sophisticated game, for 1989, like on consoles. Like obviously, games would improve kind of rapidly after this, but it is still kind of just thinking back to that time period and very early days in console video games relatively to see what this game was doing. If it's scaling up the difficulty as you're getting stronger, like that's a really cool thing. And so yeah, again, something that as when we were kids, like I could see that being like very surprising, like, oh, I gained a level, like, oh, now the next enemy is going to be really easy to beat because I'm stronger.
Yeah,
And then they throw a
exactly.
tougher enemy at you, and you're like, oh, shoot. Like, it kind of subverts your expectations a little bit, right? The whole purpose of grinding is to make the game easier, not harder. So for the game to kind of play around with that feels like almost like a Kawatsu kind of mechanic,
Yeah,
like where
that's right.
you get stronger, but you're not actually stronger kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good way of knowing where to go in the game too, because like so much of the game is open. Like you could pretty much walk to most places right off the bat,
Yeah.
but you're going to get wrecked as soon as you start getting outside of like basically the path of kind of where you should be going. Like one of the things with that Breath of the Wild is gets so much praise over is that you can go anywhere you want, but there's clearly like a path that's kind of shown to
Yeah.
you via like just kind of directing you along the way based on the enemies and that sort of thing. And it's funny to see it in this 8-bit where it's like it's very clear, like, okay, they want me to stay in this area, and then you talk to the townspeople and they mention this other area, so it's okay, clearly I want to go there. But if I start going off the path of on the way to where they tell me to go, then
Yeah.
it's a pretty quick one and done out of
Yeah, that's
just
right.
getting
That's right.
wrecked.
It is a harsh lesson to learn, I suppose, but that's one of the ways that you can signpost or you can direct players, right? Like, and again, you think of a game that's like tailor made more for the Japanese audience as opposed to a Western one. Like you understand like that maybe by a method to that was just maybe more familiar to the player base. That kind of like it is harsh, it is brutal, but it definitely gets the point across, right?
Yeah, I think.
I did find some of the stats I was talking about for, and I think this is accurate. I'm looking at a game facts post here, but it lines up with what I was saying before. So it says random encounters are determined by the type of tile you are on. Hills or desert, the chances for an encounter are 1 in 8. Barrier, swamp, brick, or forest, chances are 1 in 16. If it's grass or another type not mentioned, the chances are either 1 in 16 or 1 in 32. I don't know what would determine that, but it is kind of just funny to see like it's math, right? Like it's random number
Mhm.
generation, and that's so much of what is really kind of behind the scenes of a game like this, and a lot of the RPGs that we love today.
Yeah, well, yeah, so much relying on the random number generator. I joked, I think in the chat or whatever earlier when I had gotten to there is a point where you have to rescue the princess, and she's in the swamp cave, And so, I'm walking down and I encounter the green dragon. And the first couple times I just got absolutely crushed in like
Yeah.
one hit. So I'm like, okay, clearly not ready yet. So went and, leveled up or whatever. And I thought, I'll try my luck again. And I used, reading up as like one of the easier ways to defeat the dragon is kind of to use the sleep spell and just wail on him. So I did that, and I was lucky enough that the dragon never awoke.
Oh,
So
nice. Yeah.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. So it just like it couldn't have been any more perfect because I bet you I would have got wrecked again if the dragon had woken up because like it has like a regular attack that was taking out about 50% of my health, but then there
Oh,
was like a
man.
fire attack that basically just one shotted me. So
Yeah, that's brutal.
yeah,
And again, it's one of those another time to for an RPG lesson here, right? Like, do you grind up and try to like brute force your way through a fight like that, or do you use some kind of strategy? Like maybe one of your spells can be the key to unlocking this fight, and
yeah,
it's just one of those kind of puzzles that with RPGs, like we're constantly struggling or not struggling with, but like trying to figure out, right? How are we going to overcome this obstacle? Is it a puzzle? Do we need to use strategy? Do we need to just use effort? Do we need to endeavor to get through it? Maybe just get lucky, have some good rolls, and hopefully we maybe do some critical strikes or something like that. But I think that's why we love this genre so much, is that there are often multiple ways to solve encounters and challenges like this, right? It's never just one way or the other. We kind of have that choice, and we love having choice.
yeah. Well, and the game taught me this strategy as well because I was doing my grinding in Remulder Town, and a warlock put me to sleep
Yeah.
and finished my journey. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Again, a harsh lesson to learn, right?
yeah.
The enemy's doing what you need to do back to them, right?
For a few curse and a reset later, and back on my journey.
That's right.
I think.
So
Yeah,
you finished the game now, David, or you just got to the end here? I'm trying to remember where.
yeah. I'm
Uh,
just at the end now, so
yeah.
I've been everywhere pretty much. I started off going to Eldrick's Cave to get the tablet, then worked my way over, checked out the Koi village to see what was going on there, leveling up along the way, and then found out I was supposed to head down to the swamp cave, and it. I went to the Green Dragon way too early, all completely by mistake. I got kind of turned around in the cave because it's dark and I only had a
Yeah.
torch, and so I you can only see like one or two. I think it's only when you have the torch you can
Like
only see like one space around you in a circle.
yeah. So 9 tiles, like including the one you're standing on, are illuminated. I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
But if
so
no
I
torch, it's just one, right? It's just the one tile you're on. I think.
yeah
Yeah.
exactly yeah, which
Brutal.
is the nightmare.
No, you can't do that.
Um, so I got turned around and then I see this path, so I go in it and there was the green dragon and I thought it's like okay, I'm probably not ready for this guy. I'll run away. So I ran and then I'm like okay, when try to go back through the door again and the green dragon was there again. And I'm like okay, not a random encounter apparently.
No.
And the second time I couldn't run away. I got crushed.
Yeah.
So then figured out okay, I'm supposed to just go around the dragon at this point to get to the town just to pick up some new armor and I mean a lot of the times you just go into the towns to just level up basically, just like a new place to stronger enemies so that you're not spending as much time grinding on these smaller enemies with less experience. So
Yeah, I mean, you,
oh
you go to a
and
new area,
yeah
you've got new enemies to fight, presumably new equipment to buy, and
yeah,
the gameplay loop actually ends up being pretty simple, right?
yeah.
I was going to
Magic keys
ask,
to pick up.
yeah, of course, you got to get the keys. I was going to ask, just because your playthrough is a lot more fresh than mine, what are some of the kind of memorable moments in the game that you can recall, or that or even just memorable events that happened to you while you were playing?
Well, I laughed out loud when I saved the princess, and then I literally had to carry her back to the castle.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm like, why am I carrying her? Like, your legs can't be broken. Like, just walk behind me. But nope, carried the whole way back. Got into a few fights, which I was curious what would happen, but it's just a sprite basically. Like, I
Yeah.
got into my fights and kept going.
You just drop her on the ground and continue
Yeah,
and do your fight,
that's
and then pick her back up. Yeah.
yeah. And then apparently she was immediately smitten with me because we were already betrothed by the time I got back. So that was weird.
Well, you
Uh,
carried her all the way back. I mean, that's quite a Herculean feat there, you know.
well, that's true. And then the love that she gives you is actually useful because you can use it out in the world. It's like it becomes an item which you can then use in the just the regular world at
Hmm.
any time to tell you how much experience you need to level up. And it actually tells you, it gives you like a geographical location of how, like, you are 20 spaces north and 10 spaces east from the castle or from
Right.
where I am. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I guess it's like I can find my way back easily enough if I ever got lost, which
Throughout
was
the
good.
game, is the castle the only place you can ever save at? You have to
Yes,
talk to the
and it
queen to
is
do that, right?
so annoying.
Yeah.
So I stocked up on some wyvern wings because you can. It's kind of like a teleport back to the castle if you have wings
Right.
put
Yes,
aside.
that's right. That's right.
One of the other things that was funny to me was I went to what was the cave? Maybe it was the mountain cave, I think. And I went and got the warrior's ring, and then I left the cave, and then thought I'd go back in because there was some pretty decent enemies to grind for experience in there. So I was like, okay, I'll go back into the cave and fight some more enemies. And then I'm like, hey, the treasure box is there again. Maybe I'll go see what's in it now. And I picked up a second warrior's ring.
Nice.
And I'm like, okay, or fighter's ring, I think it's called. Actually, I think it's fighter's ring. So I had two fighter's ring in my items in my inventory, and I thought, I wonder how many is like if I should just keep going. So I just checked online just to see like, is it even worth it? And then found out that apparently there's a glitch in the North American version where the warrior or the fighter's ring doesn't actually add anything. Like
Right.
there's
Yeah.
like, so I'm like, okay, well that was a waste of time. So I stopped going back in for fighters rings, but I thought it was funny to
I guess
that
you
these
could
treasure
sell them at the
boxes
very
kept coming
least
back.
and get some gold. There's that,
Yeah.
I suppose. But
Well, I ended up dropping one because when I went to get the silver harp, apparently like you can only have so many items in your inventory.
hmm.
So then it was like, okay, you got to get rid of something if you want this harp. And I'm like, oh man, well, I'm not leaving without the harp, so I guess I'll drop my ring.
Yeah, that was something different from Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy. Was that you have like banks or storage areas where you would drop stuff off, and Dragon Quest still is a they still do that, right? They still have banks where you can deposit money so you don't lose it if you get wiped, or I think you can deposit items as well. But Final Fantasy didn't. I mean, it had limits, but there was no storage. Like if you didn't want something, you had to sell it, right? Or if
Yeah.
you were overburdened, you had to get rid of stuff. So I guess different ways to solve the same problem, right?
Yep. Um, and I had like fun experiences with some real close calls with some of the enemies. Like the Green Dragon was hilarious to keep getting wrecked, and then all of a sudden it's like he just never gets up. So
Mhm.
that was fun. There was a few close calls with like warlocks out in the wild where I was like, oh, don't, like, I've been grinding for an hour, don't kill me, like let me survive. And there was one where I was like down to 2 HP, and I think there was like a wraith that did the same thing to me, where it's like, and especially when, like you said, you can't save. The only place you can save is at the castle. So when you're
Mhm.
on the other side of the map, like you don't want to be going back to the castle every 10 minutes because you're
No.
just wasting time. So
And I wonder. I mean, did we play like that? Were we so conservative? I feel like we were. Maybe I'm just
oh
speaking for
no, I
myself, but when we were younger,
yeah
we were probably pretty brash and like, I can beat the March Cave in
yeah
one try. I don't need to
throwing the
go and
caution to the
save,
wind.
right? Like, I don't need to
Yeah,
grind
no.
anymore. I'm strong enough. I don't need 99 potions like the guidebook says. Like 10 will do.
Yeah,
Like, I think we were pretty headstrong about games like this, and yeah. I also don't know how often we learned
stubborn
our
I think would
lesson.
be the best. I think stubborn. I think we were much more stubborn as kids. So
Yeah, yeah.
getting beat, it was just more motivation to go back.
I mean, especially playing games like this, which were, I think you'd think of them as being more mature, more geared towards older folks, like, teenagers and adults as opposed to, adolescents and younger,
Yeah,
right? Like these games, which is so much text. And yeah, we were avid readers. We got into reading, or we were already into reading why we loved these games as well. But there's also just a lot of like kind of decision making that 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old brains are maybe not prepared for, right? Like that risk reward pull we're just gonna do the faster one, right? I want to get through the
Yeah,
challenge faster. I don't want to have to keep going back and saving. And I know that's safer, but it's not necessarily more fun, right? So
yeah.
these kind of games where they do have that mechanic of like, if you go a little bit further, like, yeah, you might get to the next town, or you might, lose an hour or two of your progress. And that does, it's not feel good when that
No.
happens.
Well, time's more valuable now, right? Like I'm trying to get the game done in like 10 to 15 hours, where
That's right.
back in the day, like I could have dropped 50, 60 hours and then not blinked an eye, because it's like what time is that worth? Like to a 10-year-old, what is that? It's nothing, like
Yeah, I mean,
that's
and if this was the new game or the game you rented for the weekend, like you had the whole, the week, the whole weekend to play. Like
or
failure was
months.
almost built into that
If it was
calculation.
like Christmas, if you got it as a
Oh
Christmas
yeah,
gift, it'd probably be months before you got your next game. So
and then we didn't have like the egregious backlogs that we used to have. Like
no,
if you, after you finished this game, you were going to go back and play one of your older. You're going to play Mega Man 2 again, or Mario Brothers 2 again, or something like that. It
yeah.
wasn't that you had all these other games you hadn't played or beaten yet. Yeah, so it was a totally different time where like, yeah, failure was not nearly as crushing. It hurt, but you weren't like, oh my gosh, like I don't ever want to play this again. Like at least not for you might feel that way for 10 minutes and then you boot it up again because it's the only new game you have, right? So
Yeah. So going, how does this feel to you? Going like we're 30 years out now.
mhm.
This is a pretty primitive game
Yeah.
compared to those standards. What would your, for someone who hasn't played it, would you still recommend someone go back to?
Yeah, so I think the NES one is, I would not go back to it, and I think I have tried. I think I put it on like my NES Mini at some point because I played when I first got the NES Mini. I beat Final Fantasy on it. First of all, that was one of the first things I did when I hooked that system up. I played a bunch of the classic games, the Mario games on there, and then I ended up beating Final Fantasy One, the original version. I probably had like a cheese team, like three warriors and a white mage or something like that.
Yeah,
Is where it's just super easy to finish the game.
yeah.
Didn't really challenge myself there, but yeah. But then I would have put Dragon Warrior on there, or put it maybe on a, I don't know where else I would have tried it, but I think it was on the NES Classic. And yeah, I find the game very hard to go back to, especially because of the menuing. Like you have to go into a menu, click like search or ask or use a key or open the door. Like it's all menuing.
Well,
Like
stairs isn't even automatic. I thought that was
yeah,
hilarious. Like I'm standing on the stairs and I'm like, really? I have to hit a button to climb the stairs? Like,
it's just a lot of like that thing. Just at my age now, that I found that very monotonous and tedious. And I noped out of it just because of that. Really, I'm like, oh, I know there are other versions of this game that don't do that, so I'm just gonna play them instead.
yeah.
So I know I've started up the GBC version of a couple times, that double pack of Dragon Warrior 1 and 2. So I was playing that a little bit the last couple days. And it does away with that. Obviously, I think it still looks pretty great. I think it's not a massive departure from the presentation of the NES version, but I think they just clean it up and it just feels better to play again. They've cut down on the text. The walking speed is probably about the same, but the fact that you're not menuing constantly to access new areas or to open things up and talk to people and stuff like that is, it does just save you a lot of time and a lot of frustration. So I think there
Different
are
place to
versions of this
save
game you can
in
go
that
back
one?
to. Sorry.
Is there different areas to save in that one, or is it still just the king?
So I think your main save is the castle, but you can do a quick save anywhere. So if you
Oh, that would be so helpful.
you can quick save, but it's one of those. But unfortunately, it's one of those quick saves where it takes you to the main menu, right? Like it's not a like an auto save kind of thing. It's more of like
Oh,
I need to take a break from playing kind of save. So
yeah.
2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing with that. I think you do still have to go back to the king to save. I might be wrong about that. I haven't played too much of this version, but yeah. But I think that's probably the best version to play, just because the Switch version, the mobile version, the port that came over,
So
is just
ugly.
so it's so
So ugly.
so ugly that it's I don't know how you can look at it for more than 10 minutes and want to continue with that. Even if the gameplay is better, maybe it's just an abomination compared to the original the classic games.
Oh man, like I get why they did it. Like I know mobile, like especially for the older games, makes sense for the
Yeah.
Japanese market, and I know at that point it was just easier. Like it was already there. They probably only had to hit a couple buttons to make it work on Switch. So
Yeah.
clearly that's what you're gonna do. But oh my god, it's so ugly.
And they might have had in mind already the idea to remake 3. Like that might have already been either like in the planning phases or in active development when they decided to port the mobile games to Switch. Like I could see that. Like I think they did that, as part of like, hey, Dragon Quest 11 is coming out, like let's celebrate Dragon Quest a little bit here and then just throw the original 3 games on. But I could see, okay, we're not going to, you know, remake 1 and 2 because we're already working on 3. That's the one they're focusing on. 1 and 2 are smaller games. Obviously, 3 is a lot more substantial. So if that's the one you're going to remake, then you don't really care like necessarily what version of 1 and 2 are coming out. And hey, like I don't think it's impossible that now that we have Game Boy games on Switch, I don't think it's impossible that we get some of those like Dragon Warrior 1, 2, and 3, those versions coming to Switch at some point too. I think that's not I wouldn't say I predict it, but it is an option.
Yeah, I would think that they would probably go with something like that. Like I don't foresee any kind of pixel remaster style coming
No,
for one or
no.
two, because like if they're going all in on three with the 2D HD, I just don't. I think they punted on 1 and 2 at this point, or
I
it's
mean,
like, you know
they're
what,
they're kind of the kings and queens over there at Square Enix of just trying out different ways of, and we've talked about this, they're bringing out different ways of their kind of refreshing their retro catalog. Like it's not
mm-hmm.
going to always be straight ports or remasters or remakes. It's everything under the sun is open, right? So whether that's throwing games on a virtual console type service like NSO, whether that's a pixel remaster or a full 2D HD remake. Like, who knows what's going to happen? But what I hope is that we see more Dragon Quest games come forward. I want to see like modern ways to play 4, 5, 6. All of them really up to 9. I'd love to, for them to keep experimenting with, bringing those games to modern platforms. It's because again, it's a series that I think a lot of people did end up missing because it just kind of struck out in the West so early on.
Yeah, and there's so little modern options available. Like you said, I think like DS and 3DS are basically the newest versions of those games that you'll
Yeah,
find. Like
exactly.
1 and 2, definitely there's nothing like, because I was looking it up. There's the NES version, there's the GBC version, and then there's the ugly mobile version.
Yeah, it's
Like
just
that's it.
3. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, now and we're just playing the waiting game for 3, and
I mean, I wonder, how much of like what they do with this series is going to be dependent on how well 3 does, right? Because 11 was a new game. I think it did really well. They
did
released it
really
on
well.
multiple platforms. They added new content to it. We know 12 is coming, obviously, but how they treat the back catalog of these Dragon Quest games is probably contingent on the success of 3, right? Like if this remake of 3 does well, then the world is their oyster. They can do that treatment to 5 is beloved. 5
I
is
was gonna say
probably
5 or 7 would probably be next on their list.
makes a
If
ton of sense, right?
Yeah.
Like I think 7 and 8, just because they were on 3DS, I think they're a little too fresh. But five is ripe for a remake for sure. Like it's one of the best games, if not the best game in the series. 3 getting it makes sense. Like 3, it's a big game. It's got like a lot of kind of customization in terms of your party members and stuff. I think 3 is very well kind of renowned in Japan. I think there's a lot of fondness for that game. Whereas maybe 5 might have maybe more global appeal. Or just kind of I'm trying to think. Like 5 came to DS. I think it was also a Super Famicom game. But other than those two, there's been no other kind of treatment of. But I still think it's just a game that people are very fond of, and it's an easy one to go back to as well.
Yeah, I was just looking up Dragon Quest 3. So it came out in 92 on NES,
Yep.
2001 for GBC, and then they made the mobile version in 2014, and then that's what they ported to Switch in 2019.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all. Those are the only ones we've gotten in the West. So
Yeah. So
yeah,
same. So same. So 1, 2, and 3 all kind of got the same treatment, right? Like the a Game
yeah.
Boy Color version, about a decade after the original release, and then another 10 to 15 years, and it gets the mobile version. But nothing since. So yeah, 3 is also like you get a ship. Like there's a lot of different places to visit. Like it's the first kind of Dragon Quest game, Dragon Warrior game that feels like um maybe a little bit more like original Final Fantasy, or it feels more like what Dragon Warrior would become. like just this kind of a more global, or there's a vast world to explore that you're kind of going sailing around to or traveling around to. It's the first game that really does that, I think. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
was just looking at Dragon Quest V. So it first released on Super Famicom and only in Japan. Well, it's funny in September of '92 it was released in Japan.
yeah,
In late '92 it released in South Korea,
yeah, right,
and and then there was a PlayStation 2 version of it in 2004. So that's
mm,
12 years later. But again, only in Japan.
yeah.
And we only saw it in North America in 2009. So that's almost 20 years later
Yeah.
on DS.
Such a
And it,
funny trajectory for these games, right? Like where
yeah,
they're coming, the time gap between them. Like it's not so like kind of regimented like Final Fantasy has been. Like Final Fantasy is almost, I know the last, 10, 15 years, not as much, but originally it was like clockwork, like from 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and on, like that, I mean, aside from the games that didn't come to the West originally, like still like just more regular releases from that series.
well, and I don't think that was from lack of trying. Like I think Square was really trying to keep on that that schedule of games, and things just fell apart for them when they started to do like the Final Fantasy 13 whatever
Yeah.
that turned into 15 and um,
But for 10 games, right? Final Fantasy 1 to 10, like you're pretty,
almost
you can
yearly.
set your watch to a new
Yeah.
Final Fantasy game coming out. You can look forward to it. You can like get invested in these games. Maybe a little bit easier to go back to them too because there were a bunch of re-releases, right? If you think about it, like the re-releases on PlayStation of 4 and 5, 6, and Chrono Trigger, like those packages, and then you'd get the Game Boy Advance versions of 4, 5, and 6, right? Like there were a lot of ways to replay these games. The remakes of 3 and 4 on DS, like you didn't get anything like that for Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest.
Yeah, and then even looking further ahead to like PlayStation or to Dragon Quest 8, it came out on PlayStation 2 in 2004 for Japan and 2005 for North America, and
Mm.
then nothing until the mobile version in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Must have been a big year. Like all the looks like they redone most of the Dragon Quest games for mobile in 2014. Like every game I seem to
What
see
year
is
was Dragon Quest 8 on 3DS?
uh
2013.
yeah, I think so. I'm trying to
I'm just
find.
guessing. I'm trying to think. It might have been
It
around the
doesn't
time when the
say
Wii
here.
U
Let me
came out,
just look.
maybe. But I know 7 and 8 were very close together. Those two remakes, like within 12 months, maybe.
January 20th. It's like okay, well, what year? 2017.
2017. Jeez, that was also 2017. Man, so late.
Yeah.
I can't believe that's the same. That's the same year the Switch came out. Like that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that is ridiculous.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
because
I
I'm
think
looking at there's a news article for 2016 that says Dragon Quest VIII: Journey of the Cursed King releases for 3DS in North America and Europe on January 20th.
Yeah, and I think 7 was earlier the year prior, like September maybe of 2016. Right there, I think there were a number of months away. They were pretty close together, I believe.
I would never have guessed that in a million
Yeah,
years.
yeah. I can't believe it was that late, like just late 3DS games, I guess. But
Yeah. Now I wish I had bought it back then.
no, I know. Yeah, I ended up I had both physically. I don't know if I still have them, but man, yeah,
Probably a
those were
fortune now.
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, just
Yeah.
if you have anything Dragon Quest at this point, you just hang on to it like Grim Death.
Oh, I was looking at the last three games. So in my collectathon for Square and the Nick's history, so I picked up I had Dragon Warrior. I picked up 3D World Runner,
Yep.
King's Knight, Rad Racer 1 and 2. Already had Final Fantasy. So the only three games remaining in the NES era for like localized games anyway
Mm-hmm.
are Dragon Quest 2, 3, and 4. So
Yeah. Right.
2, I'm looking at like at minimum $100. 3, I think was
Yeah.
like $100, and 4 apparently is like $200. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I might find other means to look at those ones
I mean,
because
four was such a late NES arrival, right? Like Super Nintendo was already in full swing by that point. Like I know that the NES was supported, a number of years or a couple of years into the Super Nintendo lifespan. Like that was just like they're kind of getting around the fact that there was no backwards compatibility, but it's still very, very late. You're probably already having good Super Nintendo RPGs by that time. So why would people go back to the previous console you just straight comparison of graphics. Like it makes no sense. Like if you could play Final Fantasy 2 on Super Nintendo versus Dragon Warrior 4 on NES, like
I
it's a no
yes.
brainer.
Yeah, I would have to think, and especially since like Dragon Warrior clearly wasn't selling that well in the West, there can't be that many cartridges out in the wild,
No, no, not at all.
especially now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd definitely be one. If someone, if that's one of the ones you have in your basement or your attic somehow, like you got to hang on to that for sure.
Maybe I'll have to look into it. It might have to be an RSP investment or
There you
something.
go. Yeah, that's one way to justify it to the fam, right?
Yeah, I'll have to find some way. There must be some financial institution somewhere that will allow me to put money in an RSP and purchase NES games for future retirement plans.
Frankly, I wish I had more of my investments in video games and not stocks because you'd be doing a lot better these days than.
Yeah,
I can tell you,
feels
my
that way.
sealed copy of Mario 3 on NES is appreciated a lot more than any other investment that I've made
Well,
recently.
yeah, especially lately.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, that's unless you have anything anything else about Dragon Warrior, we're basically at the point where we're just a couple days away from the latest Square Enix release that
Hmm.
you and I are both excited for.
Yeah, yeah. We could talk about that for a minute too. But yeah, Dragon Warrior. Like again, I don't know that this is like if you've never played a Dragon Warrior game, I don't think you should go back and try to play the first one. I think it's just it's an oddity in a lot of ways. The fact that you only have one party member, every single fight you get into is one on one. Like that is unique. In an RPG, we don't really see things like that. They're so focused on party members, and I think we love that. We love them for that. The fact that you can mix and match who's in your party, or you have to equip different weapons and armor to different people, and they have different stats and skills and things like that. That's part of what makes the games so fun. But this game, yeah, it is very basic. And what's funny is that again, Final Fantasy came out a year later in the West and is just so much more advanced by comparison. At least on the surface. But yeah, I do like I have a lot of respect for this first game. I think I certainly appreciate like its role in like advancing the genre. I think the Game Boy Color version is fine. Like I think if you are absolutely dying to go back and play all of them, I think that's the one I would seek out. It looks great on the Pocket for sure. But if you have another way to get, if you have the cartridge and you can play on an original Game Boy Color or a Game Boy Advance or something, like I think go for it. It's not a super long game, as you know, David. Like 8 to 12 hours, 15 hours, maybe max. Like it's not
Yeah,
it's not going to take you too long to get through. So,
it's
um,
mostly how long it takes to grind. That's the where the time is invested.
yeah, exactly. And grinding in a game like this, like again, because all the fights are one on one, and most of the time you're just kind of using your basic attack move. Like it's pretty easy just to put on a podcast or watch a YouTube video while you're grinding.
You have
So
cast hurt.
yes, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. I did want to shout out one particular Dragon Warrior piece of media, piece of content that I have a fondness for. So we've talked about games done quick, speedrunners or speedrunning event on the show before. So during AGDQ, which happens usually in January, I think, 2018, there's a Dragon Warrior speedrun by a fellow named NES Cardinality. He completes the game in 27 minutes and 19 seconds. And
That's wild.
what's more impressive than the speed is just the way that everything is kind of mapped out, like where you walk, like how many times you press the A button, like just kind of this small little details that kind of mess with the RNG that let you avoid encounters or let you beat tough enemies even though you're not leveled up enough to beat them. So I think it's a really cool short RPG speed run that kind of shows you kind of what happens in the game a little bit and just how the older games like this can just be broken, broken in half. It's got a good set of commentators on the cast with the runner as well. So if you're into speed runs in particular, or you want to see kind of a Dragon Warrior speed run, this is one I would recommend. I've watched that recently, and it's definitely a good one. Um, but yeah, just from the game itself, I think there are much better Dragon Quest games to play, and if you do have to get back to this one, I think we'll both agree that stay away from that mobile version. Just try to find
Yes.
a way to play the Game Boy Color one. I think
Any other version, Game Boy Color
just
sounds pretty good.
yeah, yeah,
Having a quick save definitely would be useful because
yeah, for
heading
sure.
back to the king every few minutes, especially when you're playing conservatively, it can it can get a bit tedious.
Yeah, definitely. And the fact that if you have that cartridge or you get that ROM, it's got Dragon Warrior 2 as well, like which you could try out. And I think probably the better game. I don't have a lot of experience with that one. I think 3 is of those opening 3. I think 3 is by far the best one, which is another reason why I'm glad that they're remaking it. But yeah, Dragon Warrior, like it's charming. Like it shows you kind of all the things that Dragon Warrior would maintain through the years, and it's just a franchise I have a ton of respect for that reason too.
Hmm.
Um, I meant to do this up front, but we just kind of got into the discussion. I do have an Oreo flavor to go through, right?
Forgot. Yep.
Yeah, that's okay. So the latest flavor I've tried is I don't even remember the name. It's like the
more,
most Oreo, right?
The
It's
most
called
Oreo.
the
That's
most
it.
Oreo.
The most Oreo.
I like the French or the Oreo Supreme or Supreme. I think it's
That's
maybe
pretty
a
good
better
one.
title, but yeah, the most Oreo. So the premise behind this one is that the filling in the middle of the Oreo is cookies and cream flavored, which is kind of the standard like Oreo flavor, right? Is cookies and cream. It's also there's a ton of filling in this cookie, so it's your standard kind of Oreo top and bottom cookie, like the chocolate one, and then probably more than a double stuff, I'd say, worth of cream or frosting in the middle. So it's quite a bit. It's a lot, but it to call it the most Oreo actually makes a lot of sense because it's an Oreo tasting Oreo. Like the filling tastes like an Oreo. Like if you were just to eat the filling by itself, you take the top of the cookie off, you just eat the filling tastes like an Oreo, and it's fantastic. So if you love I am actually really fond of this one. If you love Oreo, you would adore this one. Like if it's just the Oreo plain Oreo flavor is your jam, and you don't mind a little, a fair bit of extra frosting or cream, I think you'd really get into this one. I think it's in my top 5 actually. I love it. I don't find it too much because I think the flavor of the cream is so good. Like I just love cookies and cream as a flavor of ice cream, of anything. Like that's something I would gravitate towards.
Yeah.
So for those reasons, yeah, this is a top one for me. It's not my absolute favorite, just because it's it's a little bit more one note, obviously. But yeah, for someone who is fond of Oreos and is taste testing all these Oreos for a ranking, yeah, I'm a big fan of this one. So I would encourage people to go out and try it. It's really good.
So is Neapolitan still reigning supreme?
I mean, it's up there. I think I had Brookio as the number one,
Oh, right. Yeah.
nothing's knocked off Brookio. Brookio is still there, but yeah, Neapolitan is probably 2 or 3, and I think this one's. I think most Oreo is comfortably 4 or 5. I love it. My kids love it just because it's got so much frosting in the middle. The only thing I would knock it for is that the frosting, the way that it's put on the cookie is not very uniform. So it's it's a little messy. And because of that, a lot of the cookies, when you take them out of the box, the cookie part's kind of like hanging off of the frosting, or they're not broken, but they're just kind of like odd shapes. They're not very visually appealing. So it loses a few style points, I guess, for just kind of the haphazard way that the frosting is put in the middle. But flavor wise, I cannot fault it. It's top notch flavored cookie.
The lawyer team has just handed me a sheet of paper that says that if you are to eat the most Oreo and fall into a sugar-induced coma, the Thirsty Mage podcast cannot be held liable.
Yeah, I definitely need to caution people. I wouldn't have more than 1 or 2 of these in a sitting. It is a lot of sugar. They're super sweet. It's like 110 calories per cookie. I think a normal Oreo is maybe 50 per one.
I was gonna say that sounds like one Oreo. That's like a double Oreo right there.
Yeah, it's even more. It's a little more than a double, so it's quite a bit. Yeah, that cream is lethal, but it's just very, 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 very tasty. I do. Yeah, if people see this in stores, go out and try it. I'm not sure. It's funny with these specialty ones. You never know if they're going to stick. Like mint Oreos, cinnamon bun. I see those regularly. Birthday cake seems to have become a regular flavor, but these ones with kind of the specialty packaging, and they just feel like more of a novelty. I don't know if they're going to stick around or not. So,
well, I haven't seen Neapolitan since it came out in
nor have I.
Around the holiday time, so I think it's gone, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's one I saw the one time and then not since. The peanut butter chocolate pie one that seems to
Yeah,
be a
haven't
regular
seen that.
rotation.
Yeah.
I've bought that a couple times actually.
Oh,
At
okay.
least at our store, the Save on Foods where I go to, it's regularly there. My
Probably
kids, my
some
kids like
regional
that one
things
because
too, I'd
they
imagine.
love peanut butter. Yeah, we're hoarding all of that one on the West Coast. They're not
Yeah,
going
that's
anywhere
right.
else in the country, maybe. But yeah, no,
They know
that
where the sales are.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, most Oreo, very, very good. Definitely recommend that. Um, I know we're trying to get back to kind of a regular schedule of recording. We've got another episode coming up really soon. What's that? What are you guys going to be recording on soon, David? Or
So,
this evening?
yeah, we're going to be doing the worst title in a franchise series. So we're going to be looking at some franchises that have, been around for a long time and going for a long time, and we're gonna, share which one we think is the worst of the bunch. And at the same time, like the worst of the bunch is still better than most video games in general. But
Mm-hmm.
there has to be a last place. It's just the way things work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. Um, I know we're obviously going to do some impressions of some of the games coming out soon. I wonder if Paige will share some. I'd love to hear her thoughts on Like a Dragonetian. I know she's got a lot of other games coming up to play too. I imagine we'll be sharing more impressions of Octopath 2 as well.
Hmm.
Before we go, I wanted to ask you, who are you starting with your playthrough?
Well, I've already started with Throne,
Okay, okay.
and after learning that this isn't really a spoiler, but apparently, from what I've read, the Octopath 2 has the same thing where whoever you choose first is in your party the entire
I've
game,
read that. Yes, yes.
and I'm perfectly happy with my choice.
Yeah, I think when I read that, I'm like, oh, I should probably do the scholar because I started with the scholar in the first game and I really liked that. I
Oh
liked
yeah,
having all those magic spells, right, and being able
yeah,
to hit all the weaknesses. So I'm like, oh, so maybe I started with Cyrus in the first game. Maybe I start with I think it's Oswald is the scholar in this game. Like, oh, I know it's the same type of class, but I really want to have that class with me the whole time.
yeah.
Thief is a good call.
I always have a thief. Whatever,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what game. Like you always have to have the sneaky. Like the thief always gets you out of a jam, and I always get myself in a jam. So
the thief storyline I imagine is going to be good too. Like I think it was pretty good in the first game.
yeah,
My brother is starting thief, so I want to choose someone different from him. Um, I might go merchant. I like the idea of like building up like a big reserve of gold for the
oh yeah,
game. You know, it's just
yeah.
something like that. And I think some of the merchants' special moves are pretty cool too. So I can tell you I won't be going hunter. Like
No,
definitely not
no,
going
that's
hunter. Just
yeah.
that was
That's what
one of
it,
the last
that's
characters.
the route I went last game. I started with Hunter, and
Yeah,
yeah,
he made a huge mistake, but
made a huge mistake.
I mean, I just don't like blue mages in general. Like the idea of like capturing enemies and getting enemy abilities and kind of throwing them back at them. As
Yeah,
much as I'll tell you what I do like. I do like the sprites. I like the sprite of like the hunter throwing out like a bird or a mouse or whatever to attack. I like the way that looks. It's cool, and
yeah.
how they kind of just puff into like a bunch of like pixels afterwards or sparks after. It's kind of cool, but yeah.
At a very considerable cost.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, but yeah, we've got some good episodes coming up on the horizon. But hope everybody enjoyed our discussion of the original Dragon Warrior. It's a couple good places to play it. So you've got some options there if you want to revisit it. Check out that speed run by NES Cardinality on the Games Done Quick YouTube channel. You can look it up. But I think that'll do us for tonight's recording. So thanks everybody for joining us. Leave a review of the podcast on your podcast app. I'm going to keep reminding you, please do that. 5 stars is awesome. Leave us a comment. Be sure to read those. And yeah, we'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.